Number 3.
This happened to my friend while she was living alone when we were at uni. I know it's her story, but I was directly involved and she doesn't come on Reddit a lot. We were around 20 at the time, we're 27 now. She's not very tall and built very slim. She lived in a one-bed flat in one of these big old Georgian tenements in Scotland. So there was a door to get into the block with a buzzer to each flat outside. You could only open the door with a fob or if someone buzzed you up, and steps and doors leading to each flat on the way up. There was a downstairs utility area and a back door leading to a yard with paving slabs. She was on the second floor. The doors to the flats were big, thick fire doors with a letterbox in the middle of the door. A chain on the inside and 2 key locks and a little peephole. The light from the close was always on so that the little peephole and underneath the door had light coming through. They were pretty safe as long as the downstairs door wasn't opened, and he kept the chain on. Her place was all open planish and all sort of one big space. Her couch was sideways to the door so she could watch TV and then look to her left and see the door. The door itself was maybe 4 meters from the end of the couch. On one night around February, I guess, while she was watching TV, she hears a sort of scuffle noise from the door. She looks over and doesn't really see anything unusual. Figuring it was just somebody coming home and walking past, she continues watching her show. A few minutes later, she hears the same noise again. She looks over and there's nothing there. She does a double check at this point and she can see that the light, normally coming from that peephole, is being blocked out. She told me at this point that she just assumed it needed to be cleaned and hadn't noticed. But then decides to leave it and continue watching. I think at the time she was pretty into Merlin, so I think it was a bit she didn't really want to miss. About 15 minutes later, she hears another noise, a bit louder, and looks over. Just in time to see a man's arm being retracted from the letterbox. It had been all the way up to the shoulder, and he'd been trying to get in the lower lock. She kind of froze, and after, he pulled his arm back up, so he was looking at her through the letterbox. She didn't do anything. She just stared back. Then quickly this guy turned and left. After about 10 minutes after he'd gone, she calmed down enough to call me. She was still a little in panic. The chain had been on and the door was locked on both locks. But he'd had his whole arm through the hole. And she had no idea how long he'd been there, or whatever. She couldn't believe it. I told her to stay put and went over there. Now, I'm hardly threatening, but I figured with the two of us, hopefully this guy wouldn't try again. It wasn't too dark out, so I was pretty safe. I told her to call the police, but she didn't really want to, which I can understand. She felt like it wasn't a big deal as nothing really bad actually happened. When I got there, I did a quick look up the stairs and I couldn't really see anyone, so I figured he must have scattered. And I have this big umbrella with me just in case. We ended up calling the local police station instead of the emergency line, and they were actually really helpful. They gave us some advice on how to secure the letterbox. Now you can't bar it up because you need to be able to get post, and this place was rented, so they were a bit iffy with fixing things to the door. Instead, we used some heavy-duty non-damaging tape and stuck a crudely made cardboard and tape box over, so that you could still get post and no one could really stick their hand in. And if they did, they would just knock it down and make a bigger noise. So we think we fixed the problem. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and she's home alone again, watching a movie and messaging me on her laptop. But then she hears a noise from the door. She looks over and instantly sees that someone's outside because the little peephole is dark. She keeps typing and she's telling me that she's going to turn her webcam on, and she's going to point it at the door, and pretend to continue watching the television. whilst getting her hidden hand on her phone ready to call the police. Which I think was a smart move, because they'd either see that and leave or just not notice. And she may catch them, though the resolution would be a little shitty. I decided to keep going, but on my mobile, and hot-tail it over there, just in case I see anything. Anyway, this person just stood there for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Then she hears a soft shifting movement, and on the webcam, which, mind you, isn't exactly the best resolution, she could see the light. And next thing you know, she can hear this person is putting his arm through the letterbox. Again. Only this time there's our shitty-made box in the way. He hits that and it's not secured amazingly, so it sort of makes a big crunching noise and it gets stuck on his jacket. We left the tape so it would be sticky on the inside. As soon as he moved to put his arm through, she called the police and told them what was happening, and this guy had broken her property. And the whole time he's flailing his arms about trying to retract it. So the police lady stays on the phone and suddenly his arm is free and pulls it out. He says through the door, "I can come back." Calm as anything, and just leaves. By the time the police are there, she's a little calmer, but still doesn't have a clue who this person is. I arrived just before them, but about 15 minutes after, Peeper Creeper left, so I probably passed him on my way. They ended up talking to both of us, as I helped to put the box up, but I genuinely hadn't seen anyone, and other people who live in the tenement. Now, if the neighbors had been the chatty sort, she'd have known a lot more sooner. It turns out that they've seen this guy, and he'd been doing that for about 5 freaking weeks. Just never very loudly. Mainly just looking through the letterbox, and the neighbors had seen this guy wandering up and down. And he'd told them that he was her freaking landlord. Apparently normally carrying a large backpack-like bag. So apparently they didn't see anything wrong with this big burly man poking his arm into her flat. Which is mental. But they'd not seen that, I guess. I think maybe they thought that he was trying to carry out door maintenance with whatever was in the bag. The police were really interested in how he got in, seeing as you needed to be buzzed up without a fob. Turns out some lady in the top just automatically always pressed the open button whenever somebody buzzed, regardless of who it was. And on the most recent time, she had buzzed him in. And he'd been in the downstairs utility area. He'd even spoken to another resident. For about 3 hours before she got home, and another 3 whilst she just sat there, apparently he'd also been in the backyard on the paves just watching the windows. At the back, where her bedroom was. And no one thought to mention anything? I mean, it's not a really bad area, but she's on her own. I'd have been suspicious. Anyway, her real landlord put up a small security camera and fixed a proper cage to the letterbox. He didn't really believe that there was a problem and thought it was likely just to be a prank or something. There were a couple of students in the tenement, until the police were involved. And though they saw a guy matching the description on the footage, he never did anything like that again. And after about 2 weeks, they never really saw anyone again. So, Mr. Letterbox Peeper, let's never meet.
Number 2.
This happened when I was 13. Things weren't great at home, and I drifted into a habit of going out very late most nights and just walking aimlessly around, exploring the dull town in which I grew up. There was a girl in my class named Janet whom I didn't think had ever noticed me previously. She was stunningly beautiful and witty, and warm with a generally perfect, rocking the goth look that everyone seemed to jump onto the bandwagon. I was very much invisible to girls. Invisible to most people, in fact. Don't ask me how this came, as I'm unsure myself, but we began to meet up on some of these nocturnal excursions. Though we never became more than friends. I guess she must have been a fellow night owl, or was just bored as I was. I had no idea how to talk to girls, but I must have done something right, as somehow she seemed to like me. Though I'm hardly what you could call a ladies' man, I sure as hell liked her. We got into a routine where we would pass notes in class and she would write something scribbled to the effect of, "Meet me by the shop at 9 o'clock," and we'd hang out in there around the dark and talk about dumb things. This was the sort of town where everything shut down at night, and so we had the roads, parks, and cemetery to ourselves. She'd usually show me the house she grew up in, and I'd tell her about some of the local ghosts and legends that I'd half invented myself. We'd usually gravitate towards our school, which is surrounded now by a 7-foot chain-link fence, like a concentration camp, but in those days, anyone could wander around the path and grounds. With a big playing field and forest at the rear, there were big benches and bike sheds if we needed to rest or shelter. We were still just about young enough to have a good time without cigarettes or alcohol. So, one night, we had arranged to meet as normal, and I stood over the road from the corner shop, which was the only place in town still open so late. I was sort of watching from the shadows, as sometimes one of the staff would see me and storm outside and tell me to get lost. But Janet never showed, which was the first time. I gave her an hour and left, fairly hurt and angry, which in hindsight was overreacting. In all probability, she wanted to come meet me, but maybe her parents stopped her or something had come up. Neither of us had a phone, which was still for the rich kids back then. I couldn't really hang around waiting any longer, as it was October and cold enough so that even an indestructible teen like me could feel the chill. I wandered aimlessly until about midnight, when I wound up sat on an old bench overlooking our school, at the top of some long, gradual steps which led down to one of the several entrances to the sprawling school structures. I was miserable and dejected and could see my own breath, for like an idiot I was always underdressed for the cold British weather, and with only a thin sports jacket over a t-shirt, I was one of those kids who never needed much of a shove to sulk and strop, so I sat, shivered, and felt sorry for myself. Thoughts flashed through my head of suicide or self-harm until I noticed there was a light on at the bottom of the steps, which, strangely, I hadn't noticed earlier. The dim light shone through a small window in a door, which led to the school science block. This was bizarre. No one should have been inside the school at this hour. I sometimes stayed late, with a detention, and even a couple hours after the students left for the day. There were no cleaners or teachers left around, and the place was eerily deserted and as quiet as the grave. I decided to go have another look. I don't think I would have done it if I wasn't in such a lousy mood. I guess I figured that the evening couldn't get any worse, so I made my way down to the steps to the pale yellow glow, which seemed comforting, like a sanctuary from everything wrong with the world. My curiosity was quote-unquote off the scale, too. Maybe there's something exciting, like a robbery in progress, or some older kids who broke in looking for someplace warm to get high. The door to the school wasn't locked, and I saw the light was coming in from another door leading to the small room beneath some stairs, which I had never really noticed before. I cautiously entered into a nurse's station of sorts, a small room with a couple of old, battered school chairs and a mirror on the walk over a sink. It was stiffingly warm inside, though I saw no radiator and heard no heater. There were a couple of ancient yellowing posters on the walls about not passing on the flu or something similar. Just before I had announced my presence, a woman appeared in a small alcove and asked how she could help. I told her I'd seen the light and followed my feet. I realized my thoughts of death and dismemberment were draining and felt too foolish to tell her of such things. She had a manner about her which screamed that the only love she'd give was a tough variety. So, I said I wasn't sure what I wanted and politely inquired about her presence. She told me that she was always there at night, as a crisis nurse, without going into specifics, and I was too shy to ask any more questions. It was a small town, and the school also acted as kind of a community center too, serving as a voting station and a blood donation center, and that sort of thing. So, To my naive 13-year-old mind, her story sorta checked out. She was tiny, literally couldn't be more than 4 feet tall, and dressed like someone from the Salvation Army, with a khaki shirt and shorts, old-fashioned sandals, and a dark crimson sash around her stocky chest. I never saw her smile, but didn't really see this as strange or unfriendly until I thought about it later, also reflecting on how her language is cold for a nurse. They always call you love or dear and ask nice friendly questions and seem to want to talk, enjoy it even. Her attitude seemed formal and businesslike. Anyway, there was an awkward silence before she suggested that I must have known why I had arrived there, so I said that I guess I lacked direction, which was stupid to say but seemed appropriate at that time. She claimed she was part of a team of people to help those like me. I didn't understand what it meant at the time, but I went along with it. Showing no emotion, she began to speak of pills which might help. I mumbled a vague agreement, a little bewildered as I knew nothing really of medication back then, and she disappeared back around the corner where she had first emerged. I could hear cupboards and drawers opening, and tablets rattling in plastic jars. She told me she had just the thing to make me feel better, and spoke of doses and such like. But while she was talking in her low, soft, and slightly gravelly voice, I began to pay attention to my growing sense of dread. It dawned on me that I didn't like nor trusted this woman at all. Something was very wrong with the entire situation. Worse, I sensed that I was in real danger there and had to leave immediately. So while she was still on the back, rummaging and muttering, I slipped straight out the door and hurried home to bed, not looking back once. And I have no more memories of that night. When I awoke, the whole thing seemed unreal. I was only left with my recollection of rapidly disintegrating details, vague-like in a dream. I probably would have dismissed the whole thing as some bad nightmare if it weren't for breaking news at the school that morning. Janet had vanished at the night. She had gone out to meet someone and never returned. Everybody was talking about it, and speculation was predictably ridiculous, a smorgasbord of half-baked theories and vindictive gossip. They held an emergency assembly for everyone in our year, with a police officer stood on stage urging us to come forward if we knew or heard anything even vaguely strange or suspicious. Afterwards, officers spoke privately to some of Janet's closest friends. She had quite a few, as she was very well liked. Of course, they didn't bother speaking to me, as no one had a clue of our late-night rendezvous. In fact, no one even knew I existed. I did wonder if anyone had even believed me if I came forward to say that I'd been meeting with Janet. I probably would have been dismissed as an attention seeker, or maybe they would have seen me as a prime suspect. Weird, shambling misanthrope meets popular pretty girl. The thought did cross my mind, and how could I have told anybody about what happened that night? They would have pegged me as insane and thrown me to the wolves in one way or another. Strangely enough, though, Janet was very rarely mentioned by anyone again afterwards. No anniversaries were marked, and close friends even began to talk about other things. In a couple weeks, everything was back to normal. Except about a year later. One of our teachers took down some old posters, and beneath one was a brightly scribbled permanent marker pen about Janet. Some stupid insult. The teacher froze for a moment and then remarked quietly about how she couldn't remember Janet's surname. Then she dismissed the whole thing and carried on with her day. I turned around to look back at the rest of the class, but nobody seemed to be listening. That was the last time I heard anybody say her name. She seemingly ceased to exist, which is strange to say the least. The police seem to drop the case pretty soon, and an internet search throws up no records of her at all. I have no way of knowing if she got mixed up with some weird old woman that I encountered last night, but the whole thing seemed too bizarre to be coincidental. But all for I know, Janet ran away and joined the circus. It is maddeningly vague, and I did discreetly ask if the school ran some sort of late-night therapy service for troubled teens, and you could guess the answer. I really should have gone and said something to Janet's parents, as I consider myself at least partly responsible for her disappearance, but I was far too immature and awkward to have ever confronted them. What a wimp I was. That's the end of the story. The end of Janet, I guess. I've since moved to a new town, but sometimes I return to revisit the places where me and Janet would go on those fleeting late-night summers. The school is still there, and it's been pretty heavily redeveloped in recent years. Every part seems totally different except for those long, gradual steps down to the old science block. I walk past these every once in a while, and I stand above those steps and stare down at the school. I still wonder what the hell happened.
Number 1. I'm a biologist and frequently am by myself in remote locations. This occurred when I was 26 and somewhere between green and seasoned. I was surveying wetlands in a remote area of the Appalachians, and in a region that is primarily dominated by thick pine forests. I always got on the county assessor site and printed off a map with landowner information so I wouldn't get tagged for trespassing. That'll get you shot. At this particular site, there was a driveway that ran through the U.S. Forest Service land, which is public. That allowed me to get into this area a little quicker. This driveway was absolutely public property. At no point did I trespass. I pulled onto this road that was clearly created by the USFS and pulled off to the side about 30 yards from this private entry gate. My vehicle was a state government marked vehicle. The forest is old-growth pine, but the outer edges of the forest is thick with undergrowth, forming a kind of wall before you get under the pines in a nice open understory. I walk about 200 yards in when nature calls. I make like a bear in the woods and do my business. I'm a biologist, so it's no big deal. Midway through, I hear yelling back at my truck. I think, great, now I have to deal with this. I'm wrapping up my business and getting ready to walk back to my truck when I hear gunshots. I stopped walking and thought, yeah, I'm not walking back to that. I was at a loss of what exactly I should do. I stood there for about a minute, considering my options, when I heard whoever it was breaking through the undergrowth on the edge of the forest. Shit, he's coming into the woods, I thought. Again, this is public property. I get this really bad vibe creeping up my spine, because this is absolutely the type of area where people just straight up disappear, and they do. It's very remote, and the communities are very closed. This county has more than double the amount of game wardens of other counties for a very good reason. I take off in a crouching jog, using my sense of direction to make it out to the main road about 600 yards away. More gunshots. Except these have a crack to them. That means they're coming in my direction. There's no way he sees me. But maybe he's hearing me. Maybe he's firing above my head. Adrenaline kicks in 100% now, and I'm moving with a mix of terror and urgency to get to the main road. I eventually make it and hide under a bridge. I call a colleague and give him the details of where I am, so they can at least find my body. I then call 911. This was the first time in my life that I ever had to call 911, and the operator doesn't believe me. But eventually I get in touch with a deputy, and he doesn't believe me either. He gave me this, they're probably just shooting tin cans bullshit. It's Sunday night, 7 p.m., and he's too lazy to get off his ass. I move further away into a public hunting area, and finally a game warden stops in. He took me seriously, and few of the locals came by and commented about how that landowner is an asshole. He was from Louisiana, and he's not a local. I got along well with most of the locals I had encountered, so this made a little more sense. After about an hour, the deputy gives me a ride back to my state vehicle. That son of a bitch is parked on an ATV and had a rifle laid across his lap, waiting for me in the dark. The deputy and I get out of the car, and I just walk straight to my truck and leave. It's almost 9 p.m., and I had a 4-hour drive to get home, and I just had enough. At the time, I didn't want to talk to the guy, but now I wish I had. Who knows what conversation the deputy and him had. After this, I quietly started carrying a firearm in the field with me at all times. I'm glad I trusted my gut feeling and insisted on a police escort back to my truck. That was not an encounter or conversation I wanted to have with someone with an overly active trigger finger. I had all the guy's contact information from the county assessor site, and I thought about mailing him a map clearly stating where his property begins and ends. But I just let it go. Maybe he thought I was some type of creep or something. Displaced Louisianian? Let's not meet. Hey guys, Unit 522 here, and I want to thank you very much for watching my video. I would appreciate it very much if you would share, like, and comment. And if you're new to this channel, become one with the Unity by hitting the subscribe button. If you have a scary story or experience that you want featured on this channel, you can always send it to my email or post it on the Free Horror Stories subreddit. The links for those can be found in the description below. If you would like to help out this channel even more, consider a PayPal donation. And for more updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter. There's nothing wrong with a little darkness in your life, as long as you never forget, there's always a reason to be afraid.